We've already started with the Seven Trumpets. Welcome, Pastor. We've already started with the trumpets, and the trumpets are based in chapter 8 to chapter 11. And I think we mentioned yesterday that the purpose of the trumpets, the purpose of that prophecy, it's actually the purpose springs from the prayer, or it comes as an answer to a prayer which was made in Revelation chapter 6, 9 to 11. The souls under the altar. And we also mentioned that God listens. He may appear to be delayed. He has his own time, but he will ultimately respond. And with the trumpets, we learn that even within history, God is beginning to respond. Some of the answers will be given at the end of the end of history, but not some of them are already being given. And Ellen White mentioned something about, you remember when the Jews, the priests, the Levites, and the mob at the cross, beating their breast, saying, "Let the blood of this man be charged on us and our children," making that commitment. And Ellen White mentions that prayer will be answered. And she mentions that request was actually recorded in the seals. You remember the scroll with 7 seals? It was recorded there. I still want to check what she meant by that. It was recorded in that scroll. I think it's the seriousness of how God looks at business. And sometimes when we pray, we need to mean it, because God will answer it. We need to mean it. God will answer it. I think we are ready to get into the trumpets themselves. I think we've given the background. We gave the background, and we showed also the parallelisms between the 7 seals and the 7 trumpets. And also we mentioned that they are intended to cause people to repent. They are redemptive in nature. They are not punitive. Although they appear to be destructive, but the intention is for people to repent. And they demonstrate the mercy of God upon sinful beings. Now, another point that I want to mention to you is that the trumpets are introduced by the sanctuary scene. You remember in the past we mentioned that whenever we're going to start a block or a unit of prophecy, you always find the sanctuary scene right at the beginning. Right at the beginning. Even the trumpets are introduced by the sanctuary scene. And that sanctuary scene comes from the Levitical system, the cultic system, the Jewish cultic system. Revelation chapter 8, verse 2 to 6. We start with Revelation chapter 8, verse 2 to 6. And I saw the 7 angels that stand before God. You remember Revelation 8, verse 1. Revelation 8, verse 1 is actually the last. Revelation 8:1, it's silence in heaven, which is the very last. When he opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven. I think we dealt with that in the past. We also looked at the 30 minutes. I think we looked at 30 minutes, and that this is the prophetic 30 minutes. I think we have it in our notes. Immediately after that, we are introduced to the seven trumpets. To the 7 trumpets. Please don't misunderstand the chronological, the logic of the trumpet, the way they are couched or the way they are written, and think that because Revelation 8 verse 1 represents the 7th seal, therefore the next sequence is that of the trumpets. Are we together? It does not mean that once we get to the end of the seals, we continue with the trumpets. As if the trumpets are in future. Because at the silence simply points to the second coming of Christ. The trumpets do not necessarily mean that after the second coming of Christ, there will be trumpets. Are we together?
Yes.
They just begin a new section of prophecy. Then I saw 7 angels that stand before God. Now that word again, that stand before God, that word is usually used in the context of serving God. When you stand for God, it's when you serve God. And sometimes when you stand, it points to the standing are the faithful ones. The faithful ones. And we read in Daniel chapter 12, at that time, Michael will stand. There is this standing which has to do with intervention. But in this context, the standing has to do with serving. And we read that we read in the book of Daniel that Daniel would stand in the courts. The word stand simply means he served the covenant. In this context, the angels are serving God, that stand before God, and they were given unto them 7 trumpets. And someone asked if the word trumpet is symbolic. I checked for that. I don't have a basis to believe that the word is symbolic, but the punishments are symbolic. When the angel blew the trumpet, this took place. That is symbolic. But I didn't have the basis to believe that, or to conclude that the trumpet itself it's symbolic. 7 trumpets. 7 would be symbolic. Would point to the completeness. And another angel came and stood over the altar, having a golden censer, and there was given unto him much incense, that he should add it unto the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar, which was before the throne. Now, I want to mention something also. Thank you. This is a practice. This is a practice in the book of Revelation. You will always find the throne. Always find the throne. And many times, the throne would be within the sanctuary. It would be within the sanctuary. I want you to be able to see that. Sometimes the Ark of the Covenant would be mentioned. There are converging thoughts among the scholars. Some look at the throne and think that the throne looks, or the throne points to the altar. Quite a number of them, even some Adventists would say that, the altar. But what do you do when you have the altar? You have one altar, you have the golden altar. Then you have the throne within the same context. You understand? It becomes tricky when you have the throne, when you have the golden altar, and this would always point to the seat of God, where God is sitting. And this, it gives the impression that within the sanctuary itself, the heavenly sanctuary, God is there. God is sitting. God is in the heavenly sanctuary. I don't know why this thing rebooted. Did you touch anything, Pastor? Let me read it from why this thing is booting. And there, I think we have mentioned already there are 2 altars. Chapter 2, verse 2 to 5. Revelation 8, 2 to 5. There are 2 altars. There is this altar, which we believe that this is the altar of the altar of the sacrifice. And this one is the altar of incense. We get the impression that the angel was standing next to the altar of sacrifice. The angel was standing in front or next to the altar of sacrifice. And while he was there, he was given the incense to go and minister at the golden altar. That incense representing the prayers of the saints. And you remember the souls, the symbolic souls under the altar. He moves with the prayers of the symbolic souls under the altar. And he goes to the golden altar with them. So it actually this passage of scripture links the seals with the trumpets. Are we together? It provides a strong link between the seals and the trumpets. In that, this passage of scripture responds to the prayer of the saints and the symbolic souls under the altar.
Pastor, did you say altar of sacrifice?
Yes.
It's altar of incense. The angel was at the altar of incense, not the altar of sacrifice.
There is an altar of sacrifice outside.
Yeah.
There is an altar of incense inside. He's here, he's given an incense.
The angel.
The angel.
Now where's that? Where's the altar of sacrifice?
Outside. It is always outside.
Yeah, but my question is, the altar of sacrifice is on earth, not in heaven.
Oh, yes. Oh, you're asking if this is symbolic language or...
No, my question is, I know it's in heaven,
yeah.
But the altar of incense is in heaven, but there's not the altar of sacrifice in heaven, it's on earth. So is the angel then on earth?
Is the angel on earth? The meaning of this is that it represents the altar of sacrifice represents Christ, the cross, the cross. But the story is told in the post this that he is now here. That's why yesterday we mentioned that this is the historical context is post-cross. But I think the literal location of the angel is not intended. It's not in. I don't think when Christ died there was an angel waiting with the.
No.
Yeah, I don't think it's more symbolic language, but it points.
Because in my mind it is the angels at the altar of incense, not at the altar of sacrifice.
Yeah.
Because it can't be at the altar of sacrifice because the altar of sacrifice is on earth.
That's why I say it's post-cross. But for the sake of explanation, I'm just writing it here.
Okay.
I'm not saying in this heavenly sanctuary, outside of the heavenly sanctuary, there is this altar of sacrifice. But just for the sake of demonstrating it, how it in the Old Testament. But once you go to the book of Revelation, definitely you don't have this. You don't have this. Yes, you do have this, because we believe that the sanctuary exists. Although not all of us, even among Adventist scholars, that believe that there is the real sanctuary in heaven. Some are saying there is nothing up there. There's nothing up there. But the Bible, the Spirit, the writings of Ellen White affirm that there is something up there. And it behooves us to believe that there is something up there. Instead of going there, discover that indeed there was. Chances are we may not even go there if we don't believe that that thing is there. So it's post-cross, but the point I was trying to make is that the prophecy is introduced, one, in the context of the sanctuary. Two, as a direct link between the seals, the fifth seal, and the trumpets themselves. In other words, we are also given the purpose of the trumpets. How long will you avenge our blood? And he says to them, wait until others have been destroyed. Then after that, then we get the trumpets. In other words, the trumpets are saying, God remembered the prayers of the saints. They're simply saying that. That is the message of the trumpets. Come on. I want to read it from, not from this version, I want to read it from the version that is, I use the different version.
The cells under the altars, under the altar of incense, because it's prayers.
Say it again.
The souls under the altars, under the altar of incense.
The souls.
Because it's prayers going up, they're calling out.
Not necessarily, because the Revelation chapter 6, the souls under the altar, we have the basis, because they were under the altar. And the Old Testament allusion to that is the practice of whenever the priest would make a sacrifice, he would pour the blood under the altar. And it would make sense that those that had been slaughtered for the gospel, their blood was poured under the altar. And you remember Christ also mentioned that some would think they're doing God's work when they sacrifice the saints. And it's not under this. It's not under this. Normally sacrifices are done outside of the sanctuary. Where is this place? Just a second. I must say, the sanctuary, the trumpets, I haven't heard anyone preaching from the trumpets. Possibly after this class I will hear someone preaching from the trumpets. 1, 2, this is a very, even among Adventists, it's a controverted subject. Recently I was going through what Adventists, even among the scholars, what are they saying about their interpretation of the trumpets. And there are divergence, there are different interpretations of the trumpets from way back, from the way, so divergent. The safer interpretations are those that are based on texts, on the scriptures, not those that are not based outside of the scripture. Are we together? With the trumpets, I don't think the trumpets are intended to be preached. I don't think we have the gospel of the trumpets. I think we have the gospel of salvation. So I'm going to encourage you not to preach the trumpets or to preach the plagues. That if you don't accept the gospel, the plagues are coming. Or the trumpets are coming. Based on this prophecy, some of the trumpets have been fulfilled. Some are still going to be. In fact, we are in the end time. We are in the end time. According to this scheme of prophecy, we are actually between the 6th and the 7th trumpet. Between the 6th and the 7th trumpet. Because the kingdoms of this world have not become the kingdoms of God. So we are somewhere in the 6th trumpet, between the 6th and the 7th trumpet. And some of the fulfillments of the trumpets, unlike with the you remember the horses. We mentioned that the horses started galloping in the past. They are continuing, the white horse. But with the first trumpet, the interpretation is this is a process. This is a process. This is an event. Are we together? This is an event that took place in the past, and it's not repeated. But with the story of the gospel, the galloping horse, the white horse, the horse will continue to gallop until the end of time. But because we read in Matthew chapter 4, Matthew chapter 24, is it 14? The gospel of the kingdom will preach throughout the world. Then the end will come. You can actually say the horse will gallop until the end of time. Will gallop until then the end will come. But you cannot say that with the trumpets. Now, just to give a bad view of the trumpets, we believe that the first trumpet represents the punishment of God intended to the Jews. We believe, when we look at the text, when we look at this symbolism, the imagery that is used there, we believe the conclusion is that the first trumpet was intended to punish God's children. Are we moving together? The first trumpet is intended to punish God's children, the Jews, for one, rejecting Christ and persecuting Christians during that time. Is that a bed? We want to kill it. Trumpet. So the first trumpet is intended to respond to those that rejected Christ and crucified Christ. And crucified and persecuted his children. So the first trumpet is God's judgment starting in the house of God. So the second trumpet is intended to punish those that were sent to punish. I'm just giving you before we get to the text itself. The first one is the Jews for rejecting Christ and for persecuting. This is the first trumpet. The second trumpet is intended to punish the whip. And you see this parallel. You see this parallel with the story of Babylon. You remember the Jews were in Babylon. The Israelites were in Babylon because they had sinned against God. So God punished them. But later on, God would punish Babylon. You see the same parallel. During that time, the Jews were punished by the Romans. In the past, they were punished by the Babylonians. Now, during the time of John, the cryptic word of Rome, when the saints would talk among themselves, they would refer to Rome as Babylon. So when they talk about Babylon during the time of John, they would actually be referring to the Romans. So you see this parallel where God uses, they are used as a whip. To punish his children. Why? Because they rejected Christ and persecuted those that accepted him. And we believe that this incident took place in AD 70. And we will show how Adventists arrived at that interpretation. Although there are so many interpretations. I even saw where the seven trumpets are lined up from September 9/11 up to the end of time. We don't have a basis to, the text does not give us that impression. Are we together? So there is this punishment. God answers to the Jews, then God punishes the Roman. Then after that we see issues changing. Issues become external. In this sense, they're external. But once you get to the third trumpet, you deal with water. Water is being contaminated. Water and rivers, which are intended to nourish, but they don't nourish. Earlier on, God deals with people. But later on, you notice that there is the dealing with His word. You find the contamination. Then we discover the other ways in which God is working. Whenever God works, there are times when He uses other people to fight, to punish. But other times, to punish, He resorts to our understanding. He blinds our understanding because we reject it. He blinds our understanding. What we think it's correct, He has a way of explaining it. He says, God punishes with blindness. He allows you to, he punishes you with apostasy.
He said strong delusion.
Say it again.
He said
Our
strong delusion.
Delusion.
Yeah.
That's another kind of punishment. So that you will look at a lie and think it is the truth. He removes spiritual discernment so that we are not able to discern between right and wrong. Between right and wrong. And as we proceed with the trumpets, it becomes a deepening darkness. And issues also move to the light, where you read about the sun becoming dark. Darkness. Okay? So the third trumpet, the dark ages, fourth trumpet, secularism, fifth trumpet, this is what we believe as Adventists. Although others believe differently, you know. The fifth trumpet, the New Age ideology, the sixth trumpet, God's punishment, and then we have an interlude, then the seventh trumpet is actually the second coming of Christ.
What's the fourth one?
Say that again?
The fourth one? Secularism.
The fourth one is secularism, where God allows, the fourth one, the New Age, the fifth one, the New Age ideology. God allows us to be deceived, to be that delusion. Now, the first trumpet, there are words that are used in the first trumpet. But we need to be careful when we say, when God does not send a lie, but he removes spiritual discernment from us, so that we don't have, because we have rejected the truth, we don't have anything that will defend us from deception. Chapter 8, verse 7. Notice the words that have been used in the first trumpet. Trumpet. Key words there. The first word is hail. Hail. The first angel sounded his trumpet with the result that hail and fire. There is also fire. And also blood. Terrible mixture. Blood. And we read that 1/3 of the earth was affected. 1/3 of the earth was affected. And also the text talks about 1/3 of the trees and green grass. Now, if you look at this language, the language that has been used, starting with the first three, you discover that you get an allusion to the plagues. You remember the plagues of Exodus? There was this hail, which was this hail in Egypt. The hail was mingled with fire. Go to the book of Exodus. It was mingled with fire, and it fell among the Egyptians. But Goshen was saved. And also you read about blood. Now blood, if you notice, in among the trumpets, when we deal with the trumpets, the blood does not necessarily mean the you notice that it is not used in a positive sense. Are we together? But it is used within the context of Exodus, of the plagues. You remember the river Nile turning to blood. So we mustn't understand it within the context of the saving blood of Christ. It has been used in a negative sense, as a punishment. So you have this allusion to the plagues. But then also you get that the 1/3 of the earth was affected, and 1/3 of the trees. it gives us the impression that there is some control. There is some control. It's not worldwide. There is some control. Now, if you go to the New Testament and also the Old Testament and also the New Testament, you'll find that whenever Christ uses the word trees and grass, they are always used in relation to God's children. You remember in the fig tree, the story of the fig tree. The story of the fig tree. Christ comes to the fig tree. The leaves are good, they are excellent. They give the impression that the tree has yielded some figs. And when he tries to pluck some tree, some fruit, he discovered that the tree was actually, it was just, the tree is hypocritical. It gives the impression that it has fruits, but it doesn't. Then he punishes the tree. He curses the tree. And we read also in the Old Testament, Old Testament, where the story where the gardener who takes care of a tree and nurtures a tree, and the tree does not yield, and someone says, but give it a chance, and the chance is given, and again the tree does not yield, then cut the tree, bend the tree. And many times it is within the context of the Jews, or the Israelites in the Old Testament, the Israelites. The tree, the green trees or the green grass refers to God's children. In this sense, it appears that the punishment is intended to the green grass. Those that were expected to yield fruits, those that were expected to represent God, but they did not represent God. Hence the imagery or the symbolism of the green of the trees. I think there are several verses to that effect. Let me see if I find a verse for the trees. And you also find that the fruitful trees, Psalms 1 verse 3, Psalms 52 verse 8, 92, 12, and also Isaiah 61, 3. Now, whenever it talks about whenever the grass is dry, it's dry, it often points to God's children who have all. Let me explain this way. When green grass are those that are supposed to do the will of God, but they turn away from it. They don't do the will of God. When they become a dry grass, it is God's children in apostasy, in deep apostasy, where they have turned, where they have become like the Gentiles. So when they are punished, it becomes sad. And also the dry grass, it's also used in the context of the Gentiles, or those that were not God's children. But when there are other senses where God's children come to rebel against God to the point that they become like Gentiles, so that they move from being green to being dry. But in the first trumpet, we have a belief that it points to the punishment of the Jews. And the Old Testament would always talk about, God usually uses this when he punishes. These are the instruments of punishing, just like they were used in Egypt. But then the same instruments that were used against the Egyptians are now used against the green grass. So, and again, if you read the book of Deuteronomy, these are the covenant punishments. And covenant punishments. And these covenant punishments if God's children are disobedient, they can be turned against God's children. As in this, just like in this context, in the first trumpet. So the first trumpet gives us the impression that God is actually all out to punish the Jews. We also read in Matthew chapter 3, trees were a symbol of fruitless Jews who had rejected John the Baptist's message and thus were exposed to the fire of messianic judgment that Jesus would pour out. Okay. So we get the Egyptian plague, we get the background of the Egyptian plagues, we get the instruments that God used during the time of in Egypt, and we discover that God uses the same instruments to punish his children. Any discussion? Any discussions?
You gave a very quick summary of the meaning of the trumpets from the first to the last. You mentioned things such as the New Age ideologies. I want to know how current are those interpretations on those seven plagues, or how ancient are they? In other words, did we come to a belief that a particular trumpet means the New Age ideology, while the New Age ideology has already unfolded or before it has unfolded?
Okay. The interpretation is not on the trumpet itself. There is a blowing of trumpet, and when after the angel has blown the trumpet, then there was this. Then that's why in this sense, how current is that interpretation? Look, all of them are couched in agricultural terms. Agricultural terms, or the language of the plagues, the language of the covenant curses, and the language of nature, water, the springs, the seas, and now and then it will talk about the locusts, and what we do when we encounter the word, we look into the Old Testament. What is the understanding of the locust in the Old Testament? Old Testament will talk about the enemies of God. Enemies of God are always referred to as locusts, and you get the tail, the locust with tails of the scorpion. So the tail in the Old Testament refers to the false prophets. False prophets. Now, our time is running. Now, your question is, how current is that interpretation? We look at the point of departure, and we say, this is post-cross, based on the sanctuary language, based on but then we also look at the fulfillment of that prophecy, where we believe it took place in 70 AD. And we look at the language that is being used, the green grass, this and that. We compare it with the language of the Old Testament, the language of the New Testament. And time determines as to when this. Then this would be the first trumpet, second trumpet, third trumpet, fourth trumpet. We keep on looking into history. What happened in history that would look like what we are reading in terms of fulfillment? But then there are several interpretations. I'll bring some of the interpretations. Some of them you will laugh when we read them. But that's all they have. That's all they have. Let's come back tomorrow and continue with the trumpets.